He began helping him organize the garage, creating a small corner for the kids he taught. She even helped him design flyers for free CR repair classes, smiling as he struggled to understand her laptop. It was simple, honest work, and she loved it. But just when things started to feel right again, a phone call changed everything. It was late evening when she got it. The voice on the other end said, "We've traced some of the financial issues back to your ex, but it looks like someone tried to frame you too. There's a chance this could get serious." Her hands went cold. "What do you mean, serious?" "There might be a warrant coming if we don't clear your name soon. You need to be careful." Her heart sank. Just when she thought things were finally calming down, the storm returned, and this time it was heading straight for her. She looked out the window, her mind racing. She had no idea that the man who once fixed engines would soon be the only person who could help her fix her life again. And this time, in ways neither of them could have imagined. Days passed and the news didn't get any better. Her name kept appearing in headlines next to her ex's, even though she had done nothing wrong. Every time she turned on the TV or opened her phone, there it was, her picture, her company, her downfall. She barely left her apartment except to visit him at the shop. It was the only place she could breathe. Somehow that little garage full of oil, tools, and noise had become her calm. He never asked her about the news or the company. He just handed her a cup of coffee and let her sit quietly in the corner, where she could watch the kids he trained laugh and work. One evening, she sat there longer than usual, watching the last of the teens leave. He was still working under a car, his hands covered in grease, a small radio playing soft music beside him. When he finally rolled out from under the car, he noticed her staring. "What?" he asked with a teasing smile. "Do I have something on my face?" She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You just look peaceful, like you actually love what you do." He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the car. "I do," he said simply. "This place may be small, but it's mine. Every little part of it has a story." She smiled faintly. "I used to think peace came from success, from having everything under control. But now I think maybe peace is just this." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes peace shows up in the places you least expect." There was a moment of quiet between them, not awkward but soft, real. The kind of silence that says more than words ever could. A few days later, she was called in for questioning. Her lawyer accompanied her, and though the officers were polite, the experience shook her deeply. She answered every question truthfully, showing documents and proof of her innocence. When it was over, she walked out of the station with trembling hands. Outside, he was waiting for her, leaning against his truck. She hadn't told him where she was going, but somehow he knew. She looked at him, her voice barely steady. "How did you know I'd be here?" He smiled gently. "You said you had something to handle. I figured you might need someone after." For the first time that day, she smiled. Really smiled. "You always show up," she said softly. "I told you," he replied. "You're not alone anymore." He drove her home, and when they reached her building, she hesitated before getting out. "Do you think this will ever end?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "Storms don't last forever," he said. "But sometimes you have to walk through the rain to see the rainbow." She nodded slowly, holding on to his words like a lifeline. Weeks went by, and little by little, the storm began to calm. The investigation cleared her name completely. Her ex-fiancé's crimes were exposed, and the truth finally came out. She had been framed to cover his mistakes. For the first time in months, she could breathe freely again. When the news broke, reporters flooded her doorstep once more, but this time, the tone was different. They wanted her side of the story. They wanted to know how she had handled it all with such grace. She didn't say much. Just one short statement. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just waits for the noise to fade. After that, she made a decision. She called an emergency board meeting. The same people who had asked her to step down were now eager to welcome her back. But when she stood at the head of the long table, she surprised them all. "I appreciate the offer," she said calmly, "but I won't be coming back. I've realized something, and power isn't peace and success isn't happiness. I built this company once, but now it's time to build something that matters more." Before anyone could argue, she walked out, leaving behind the place that once defined her. Over the next few weeks, she disappeared from the headlines. People speculated, but she didn't care. She was finally living quietly again, spending more time at the garage helping him run free repair workshops for families who couldn't afford car service. Together, they started something new, a small foundation that helped young people learn real skills and find stable work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. And for her, that was enough. The grand opening of the foundation's first training center came on a bright Saturday morning. The air buzzed with excitement as kids, parents, and community members gathered around. A few local reporters showed up too, eager to cover the story of the fallen CEO who rose again to help others. She stood at the small podium, her voice steady but warm. "Not long ago," she began, "I thought life was about being in control, as about fixing everything that went wrong. But sometimes life isn't meant to be fixed. Sometimes it's meant to be rebuilt piece by piece with the right people beside you." The crowd applauded. She looked toward the back where he stood with his arms crossed and a proud smile on his face. After the ceremony, people mingled and toured the new workshop. He walked up to her quietly, holding something in his hand. "You forgot this," he said with a soft grin. She looked down. It was her old silver bracelet, the one she had dropped twice before. It sparkled in the sunlight, cleaned and polished. Her eyes softened. "You kept it all this time?" He nodded. "Couldn't let you lose it again. It's kind of a symbol now, isn't it?" She smiled. "A symbol of what?" He looked into her eyes. "Of how some things are worth fixing, and no matter how many times they break." She laughed gently, emotion filling her chest. "You always know what to say," he shrugged. "Maybe I just learned from you." As they stood there, surrounded by laughter and music, he reached into his pocket again, this time pulling out a small velvet box. For a second she froze, her breath catching. He opened it, revealing a simple gold ring. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant, just pure and honest like him. He took a slow breath. "You once told me to fix an engine or there'd be no marriage," he said with a soft chuckle. "Well, I fixed more than an engine. I fixed my life and then maybe yours too. So now I'm asking, can we fix forever together?" Tears welled in her eyes. The same woman who once believed love was a distraction, who shouted orders and hid behind walls, now stood speechless in front of the man who had quietly changed everything. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The crowd around them cheered, clapping and laughing. He slipped the ring onto her finger and she leaned forward, whispering, "You're the best thing that ever came out of a broken engine." He laughed softly. "Guess that car breaking down wasn't such bad luck after all." Later that evening, when most of the guests had left, they sat together outside the new workshop. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. She rested her head on his shoulder and said quietly, "I used to think my story ended when I lost everything. But maybe that's when it really started." He smiled and put his arm around her. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what's real." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I never thanked you properly, for believing in me when no one else did." He turned to her with that familiar calm expression. "You don't have to thank me. You did the same for me. You helped me dream bigger." They sat there in silence, the world soft around them, the sound of crickets mixing with distant laughter. The garage lights flickered on, glowing warm and steady, a small reminder of how far they had come. Months later, the foundation grew faster than either of them expected. Kids from all over the city joined the training program, and her name became associated not with scandal but with hope and change. One evening, as she locked up the center, she noticed a new sign above the door. He had put it up quietly while she was away. It read, "Rebuild Center, because every heart deserves a second chance." She smiled, running her fingers over the words. Behind her, he wrapped his arms around her waist. "You like it?" he asked softly. "I love it," she whispered. "It's perfect." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood there together, two people who had started on opposite sides of the world, now building a life hand in hand. It wasn't a fairy tale and it wasn't perfect, but it was real, full of mistakes, lessons, laughter, and love. And in the quiet hum of the night, surrounded by the gentle glow of the workshop lights, she finally understood what peace truly meant. It wasn't about power or success. It was about moments like this, simple, honest, and shared with someone who saw her not for what she had, but for who she truly was. The same woman who once yelled, "Fix this engine or no marriage," now smiled at the man beside her and whispered, "Thank you for fixing me instead." Months had passed since the foundation opened its doors and life, T had B. The morning sun had barely risen when the sound of metal tools echoed through the small repair shop at the corner of the street. The smell of oil, smoke, and coffee filled the air. The mechanic, a tall man in his early 30s, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag. He had already been working for 2 hours trying to finish a job before the next customer showed up. He didn't have much, but he was proud of what he built. His shop wasn't fancy. It had 1 lift, 2 workbenches, and an old radio that played soft blues music all day. But it was his place, his peace. People in the neighborhood respected him because he worked hard and treated everyone kindly. He never charged more than he had to, and he often fixed small things for free, especially for older folks who didn't have much. That morning felt like any other. But fate had something different in store. A loud engine roared outside, then coughed and sputtered. A shiny black convertible stopped right in front of his shop, leaving behind a trail of smoke. The car was the kind that cost more than his entire shop. The mechanic looked up, surprised. From the driver's seat stepped out a woman dressed in a cream-colored suit and high heels. Her expression was sharp and impatient. She slammed the car door harder than she meant to, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care how you fix it, just fix it," she shouted into the phone. "If this car doesn't work, there won't be a wedding to go to." She hung up and exhaled loudly, rubbing her temples. Her diamond bracelet shimmered in the sunlight as she tried to compose herself. The mechanic could tell she was someone used to being obeyed. She looked around the dusty shop and frowned, as if she had stepped into another world. He walked up slowly, wiping his hands on the rag. "Morning, ma'am. Looks like your car's having a bad day," he said politely. She turned toward him sharply. "Bad day? You have no idea. This engine just died on the highway and my fiancé is already furious. Fix this engine or there will be no marriage." Her voice was loud and full of frustration. The mechanic didn't react. He had seen anger before. Sometimes people used it to hide fear or stress. He just nodded and said, "Let's take a look." She crossed her arms and watched as he lifted the hood. Smoke puffed out. The mechanic waved it away and peered inside, instantly spotting several issues. Whoever had been maintaining this car clearly didn't know what they were doing. A few parts were worn out and the oil hadn't been changed in months. He worked quietly, his fingers moving with precision. The woman paced behind him, checking her watch every minute. She sighed loudly, muttering to herself about meetings, investors, and wedding planners. At one point she snapped, "Do you even know what you're doing? This isn't some old truck. This is a top-end European engine." He glanced up briefly, calm as ever. "Yes, ma'am. Engines don't care how expensive the car is. They just need care and time." His calm tone seemed to irritate her more. "Well, I don't have time," she said. "I'll do my best," he replied, tightening a bolt. Minutes passed. The tension was thick. She scrolled through her phone, sending angry messages while he focused on his work. The radio in the background hummed a soft tune that somehow made the scene feel quieter, even though she was restless. Then, without warning, the engine gave a loud pop. A burst of smoke shot up and the woman jumped back with a startled cry. The mechanic's instincts kicked in instantly. He reached in, turned off the ignition, and moved a cable out of the way just in time to stop a spark from hitting spilled oil. For a moment, everything froze. The woman stared at him wide-eyed. The smell of burnt oil filled the air. Her heart pounded. He coughed lightly, waving the smoke away, then smiled faintly. "Almost caught me there," he said, brushing ash from his sleeve. She didn't say anything. Her voice, usually so strong, seemed lost. She watched him as he calmly returned to fixing the issue as if nothing happened. For a second, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. How steady his hands were, how patient his face looked even under pressure. He finished his work and wiped his hands. "You're good to go now," he said. The woman hesitated, unsure how to respond. "That's it?" she asked. He nodded. "That's it. Try starting it." She got in, turned the key, and the engine purred smoothly. The sound was perfect. No rattles, no smoke, just a clean, powerful hum. Her expression softened for a brief moment, but her pride wouldn't let her show gratitude. She adjusted her sunglasses and said stiffly, "I'll send payment through the company account." "Cash is fine," he said simply. She took out her wallet, handed him the bills, and without another word, she drove off. The mechanic watched the car disappear down the road, shaking his head slightly. He'd seen all kinds of customers, kind ones, angry ones, quiet ones, But this woman was different. There was something behind that anger. Maybe fear, maybe loneliness. He didn't know. He went back inside the shop to clean up, but as he swept the floor, something shiny caught his eye near the workbench. He bent down and picked it up. It was her diamond bracelet, the same one that had glittered in the sunlight earlier. It must have fallen off when she was pacing around. He held it in his hand for a moment, unsure what to do. He could have kept it. It was worth more than a month's pay, but that wasn't who he was. He placed it carefully in a small box near the counter and wrote a note. Left behind by customer with the black convertible. The day went on quietly. More cars came in, more repairs were done, but his mind kept drifting back to that woman, the CEO who shouted about her wedding. Something about her eyes when the engine nearly exploded stayed with him. Beneath all that anger, there had been fear. Not fear of the fire, but something deeper. Something she didn't want to face. Later that night, as he closed the shop, he looked at the box again. He knew he couldn't just keep the bracelet there. Someone like her probably wouldn't even notice it was missing right away, but he couldn't rest until he gave it back. He checked the invoice she'd signed. Her company name was printed neatly across the top in gold letters. Everyone in town knew that company. It was one of the biggest in the city, a place that seemed far away from his world of grease and wrenches. He thought about it for a while, then sighed and smiled to himself. "Guess I'll be visiting the big city tomorrow," he muttered. He locked up the shop and walked home through the quiet streets. The night air was cool, and the city lights glimmered in the distance. He didn't know what he was walking into, but somehow, he felt it wasn't just about returning a bracelet. Maybe life had a funny way of connecting people who would never normally meet. The next morning, he woke up early, polished his boots, and put on a clean shirt. He didn't own a car fancy enough for the city, so he took the bus. During the ride, he looked out the window at the tall buildings coming into view. He felt slightly out of place but calm. He wasn't there to impress anyone, just to do the right thing. When he finally arrived at the company headquarters, it took him a moment to take it all in. The building was massive, made of glass and steel, with the company's name shining in silver letters above the entrance. He walked up to the reception desk, holding the small box. The receptionist looked at him with polite confusion. "Can I help you?" "Yes," he said, smiling gently. "I'm here to return something that belongs to your CEO." The receptionist blinked. "To her? Personally?" He nodded. "She left it at my shop yesterday. It's important." The woman hesitated but picked up the phone to call upstairs. Moments later, an assistant came down. When she saw the mechanic, she frowned, clearly surprised. "You're the guy who fixed her car?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "She left this behind." The assistant's expression softened. "Wait here." A few minutes later, the CEO appeared, looking surprised to see him standing in the middle of her lobby, holding a small box. She was dressed sharply again, but this time her tone was more guarded. "You came all the way here for this?" she asked quietly. He handed her the box. It seemed important. She looked at it, then at him. For a second, her face softened. She didn't know what to say. "You didn't have to," she finally muttered. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." He turned to leave, and for the first time in a long time, she was speechless. Something about his calmness unsettled her, not because it was rude, but because it was sincere. As he walked out of the building and back into the busy street, she stood by the window watching him go, wondering why a simple mechanic had left her feeling more seen than anyone else had in years. And though neither of them knew it yet, that small act of honesty would be the beginning of something that neither money nor status could have ever planned. The next day, the mechanic couldn't stop thinking about what happened at the company building. He wasn't sure why the memory stayed in his mind so clearly. The look on the CEO's face when she saw him there, the way her voice softened for a brief second. Maybe it was just the surprise of seeing two worlds cross in such an unexpected way. Back at the shop, things returned to normal. The same old customers came by. The same clanking of tools filled the air and the same smell of oil hung around. Yet something felt slightly different to him. Every time he wiped his hands or looked out the open garage door, he thought about that woman and her expensive car. It wasn't attraction in the usual way. It was more like curiosity. There was something in her eyes that day. Loneliness hit her. In anger, he tried to shake it off. After all, she was someone from a completely different world. someone who probably wouldn't even remember his name. But he was wrong. Inside the tall glass office building, the CEO sat in her corner office, staring at the diamond bracelet resting on her desk. She hadn't expected him to return it personally. He could have easily kept it or sent someone else, but he showed up himself, calm, polite, and sincere. It bothered her in a strange way, not because it was bad, but because it made her question things she hadn't thought about in years. Her assistant knocked gently on the door. "Your meeting starts in 5 minutes. "I'll be there," she said softly, still looking at the bracelet. All day, her mind wandered. She tried to focus on presentations and numbers, but her thoughts kept going back to that quiet man in the worn-out jacket. The more she thought about him, the more she realized how rude she had been that day at the shop. But apologizing wasn't something she did easily. Later that evening, her phone buzzed. The name flashing on the screen made her heart drop. It was her fiancé. She hesitated before answering. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual. "I can't do this anymore," he said bluntly. She froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean the wedding, the constant control, the endless stress. You're always barking orders like you're in a board meeting. I can't be part of this." Her chest tightened. "So that's it? You're ending it over the phone?" He sighed. "I think it's best for both of us. Goodbye." The line went dead. For a moment, she just sat there staring at her phone. Her world, so perfectly organized and controlled, suddenly felt like it was collapsing. She closed her eyes, trying to hold back tears. The engagement that had been the talk of the town, the thing she thought would finally make her life complete, was over. She didn't tell anyone at work. She couldn't. Instead, she worked later than usual, hiding her pain behind numbers and deadlines. When she finally left the office, it was raining. The streets were slick and quiet. She drove aimlessly for a while, not knowing where to go. Half an hour later, her car made a strange noise. Then it stopped completely. She tried to start it again, but the engine only sputtered and coughed. "Not again," she whispered. Rain poured down harder. She sat there staring out the window, her reflection blending with the rain. She didn't want to call anyone from work or her friends. They'd ask questions. Her eyes fell on a small business card tucked in her purse. It was the mechanic's card from the shop. His name and number were written neatly in blue ink. For a moment, she debated. Then, with a deep sigh, she dialed. "Hello?" came the calm voice from the other end. "It's me," she said, hesitating. "The woman with the black convertible. My car broke down again. Where are you?" he asked immediately. She gave him her location. He told her to stay put. About 20 minutes later, headlights appeared in the rain. A pickup truck pulled up behind her car. He stepped out wearing a raincoat, holding a flashlight in one hand and a small tool bag in the other. Rain soaked his shoulders, but he didn't seem to care. "Looks like your car misses me," he said lightly, offering a small smile. Despite her mood, she almost laughed. "It's been one of those days," she muttered. He nodded and got to work. The rain poured down, hitting the hood of the car like drums. She watched him quietly as he crouched beside the engine, completely focused. There was something peaceful about the way he worked. No rush, no complaints. Just quiet determination. After a while, he stood up, brushing rainwater from his face. "You should be good now," he said. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, reaching for her purse. He shook his head. "Nothing. You've had a rough night. Get home safe," she frowned. "I can't let you work for free." "You can," he said gently. "Not everything needs to be fixed with money." His words caught her off guard. She wasn't used to people refusing payment. She wasn't used to kindness without a price. She wanted to say something, but no words came out. He gave her a nod, then turned toward his truck. For some reason, she didn't want him to leave. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Thank you for helping me." He looked back with a kind smile. That's what people are supposed to do. Then he drove off into the rain, leaving her standing there, wondering why her chest felt warm for the first time in a long while. The next morning, she walked into her office early, still thinking about what he said. The world she lived in was full of deals, conditions, and contracts. Everything came with a price. But that night, a stranger had shown her something different. Help with no expectations. Over the next few days, she couldn't stop replaying that moment in her head. She even found herself driving past his shop once, pretending to be on another route. She saw him through the open garage door, laughing with a couple of teenagers who were helping him clean tools. He looked happy, like a man who had found peace in his simple world. She didn't go in, but something about that scene stayed with her all day. Back at the shop, the mechanic noticed her car pass by, though she probably thought he didn't. He smiled to himself, shaking his head. People like her don't just drive through this part of town for no reason, he muttered quietly. He didn't think much more of it, though. Life went on. A few days later, she showed up again, this time in the afternoon. He was under a car when he heard the familiar sound of her heels clicking on the concrete floor. He slid out, surprised to see her. "Your car again?" he asked. "Something like that," she said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I just wanted to check if it was still running fine." He knew that wasn't the real reason, but he didn't call her out on it. "It's running perfectly," he said. "Whoever fixed it must know what he's doing." She smiled a little, looking around the small shop. "You work alone, mostly. But some kids from the neighborhood help me after school," he said. "Keeps them busy, teaches them a skill." She nodded, watching as two young boys waved at him from the corner. They looked up to him with respect. Something about that made her chest tighten again. "You teach them?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said. "When I was their age, someone did the same for me. Just trying to pass it on." She didn't know what to say. For a woman who spent her life surrounded by power and money, the simplicity of that answer made her feel small, but in a good way. When she left that day, she felt lighter. It wasn't love or anything romantic yet. It was something simpler, curiosity mixed with admiration, but fate wasn't done with them. Later that week, trouble came to his doorstep. His landlord showed up at the shop with papers in hand, demanding late rent. Business had been slow, and he'd been using his savings to pay for tools and to help the kids with school supplies. The landlord warned him that if he didn't pay by next week, he'd lose the shop. He didn't tell anyone. Not even the boys who helped him. He stayed calm, telling himself things would work out somehow. But the next morning, when he came to open the shop, he found an envelope taped to the door. Inside was a note that said, "For the rent. Don't argue." Along with it was a cashier's check covering the full amount. He didn't need to guess who sent it. That afternoon, she came by again, pretending to need an oil check. He confronted her gently. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She looked away. "I know, but I wanted to." "It makes me feel like a charity case," he said quietly. "That wasn't my intention," she replied. "I just didn't want you to lose this place." For a moment they stared at each other in silence. He sighed and said, "I appreciate what you did, but next time, just let me handle it my way." Her eyes softened. "All right," she said, almost whispering. But as she drove away that evening, both of them felt something shift inside. For her, it was the beginning of humility. For him, it was the start of something that would soon test his pride and his heart in ways he never imagined, and neither of them knew that. The story between a CEO and a small-town mechanic had only just begun. After that day, something changed between them. The CEO didn't come by pretending to check her oil anymore. She came by just to talk. Sometimes she brought coffee, saying she was in the neighborhood, though both of them knew that wasn't true. Other times, she'd sit quietly on an old chair near the wall, watching him fix cars while tap, and being her phone or scribbling notes. At first, the mechanic didn't know how to handle it. He wasn't used to having someone like her in his world. Her clothes were always spotless. Her perfume filled the air, and even the way she sat made the dusty shop look out of place. But slowly, it stopped feeling strange. She started asking him about engines, how they worked, and why he loved fixing them. He'd explain things in simple terms, his voice calm and patient. She'd listen, sometimes pretending to understand more than she did, just to keep the conversation going. He noticed how her expression softened every time she laughed, which wasn't often, but when she did, it felt real, not like the polite smiles she gave in her corporate photos. One afternoon, she arrived earlier than usual. The mechanic was teaching two boys how to change brake pads. She stood by the door watching them. The boys laughed and asked questions while he guided them with care, never raising his voice. She could see how much they respected him. After the lesson, one of the boys ran up to her, wiping his hands on his overalls. "You the lady from the big office building?" he asked. She nodded with a smile. "Something like that." "He's been helping us for months," the boy said proudly, pointing to the mechanic. "Says we gotta learn something useful, so we..." Don't end up on the wrong side of life. She looked at the mechanic and saw something she hadn't seen before, and someone who didn't just fix cars but fixed people's paths quietly, with patience and kindness. When the boys left, she turned to him. You do this for free? He shrugged. They don't have much, and I had someone who helped me once. Just paying it forward, she smiled faintly. You really believe in that, huh? Doing good without expecting anything? He nodded. If you expect something every time you help, then it's not kindness anymore. It's business. Those words stayed in her mind for days. In her world, everything was about transactions, deals, and profits. But this man lived by a different rule, one she didn't quite understand yet but wanted to. A few weeks passed like that. She came by almost every other day. The townspeople started noticing. They whispered and pointed, curious why a rich businesswoman was spending time in a small mechanic's shop. Some joked, others speculated, but neither of them cared much. For the first time in years, she found peace in simple moments, sitting on a stool, sipping coffee, watching him work. There was no noise, no pressure, no fake smiles, just silence and honesty. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, she asked him a question that had been on her mind. Why did you become a mechanic? You're clearly smart enough to do other things. He wiped his hands and leaned against the car. I was studying engineering in college, he said. But my mom got sick and someone had to take care of her. I dropped out and started working in a garage to pay the bills. I learned everything from the ground up. Never went back to school after that. She looked at him quietly. Do you ever regret it? He smiled. No. My mother always said life doesn't always go the way you plan, but it goes the way it should. I believe that. His words touched something deep inside her. She thought about all the years she spent chasing success, building an empire yet feeling empty. This man had lost opportunities, money, and maybe even dreams, yet he seemed more at peace than she'd ever been. The next week she decided to help him again, but this time in her own way. She called one of her contacts who handled property leases and asked about the shop's ownership. She found out the landlord had been planning to sell the building soon. Without telling the mechanic, she bought the property quietly and had it registered under his business name. She told herself she did it because he deserved security. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. She admired him, respected him, maybe even cared about him more than she wanted to admit. A few days later, when the news reached him through the landlord, he was stunned. He didn't believe it at first. When he confronted her, she was sitting at the counter with her coffee, acting like nothing happened. You bought the shop? He asked, his voice calm but firm. She looked up, pretending not to understand. I just made sure you wouldn't lose it. You had no right to do that, he said quietly. You should have told me, she frowned. I was trying to help. I don't need charity, he replied. His tone wasn't angry, just hurt. It's not charity, she said quickly. It's gratitude. You've helped me more than you realize. He shook his head. You think because you have money you can fix people's lives. But some things can't be bought. Not pride. Not peace. Her chest tightened. I didn't mean to insult you. I know, he said softly. But sometimes help feels like pity when it comes from the wrong place. He walked away to the back of the shop, leaving her sitting there speechless. For the rest of the week, she didn't visit. She wanted to, but something held her back. She didn't know how to face him after that. She had tried to do something good, but it ended up hurting him instead. He, too, felt the silence. The shop felt emptier without her voice, without the sound of her heels echoing on the concrete. He missed their conversations, her curiosity, her laughter that came so rarely but lit up the whole space when it did. One evening he was closing up when he saw a familiar car parked down the street. It was her, sitting behind the wheel, just watching the shop quietly. He didn't go out right away. He waited, wondering if she'd come in, but she didn't. After a few minutes, she drove off. He sighed deeply. He knew she meant well. Maybe he had overreacted. Pride was something he held on too tightly. Maybe too tightly sometimes. Days turned into weeks, and their world started drifting apart again. She buried herself in work, trying to fill the silence with meetings and numbers. But even during her busiest moments, her mind wandered back to that small shop, to the man who had shown her what genuine kindness looked like. Then one morning, she got a call from her assistant. Ma'am, there's some issue with the finance department. The auditors found irregularities related to your ex-fiancé's projects. Her heart sank. She knew he had handled some contracts before they broke up. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Serious enough that the board wants an explanation." By afternoon, the story started spreading. The media caught wind of it, painting her as part of the problem. Even though she had nothing to do with his actions, her name was tied to his reputation. The company's stock dropped and investors started doubting her leadership. She sat in her office that night alone, watching the city lights through the window. Everything she had worked for was slipping away, and for the first time she had no idea how to fix it. Meanwhile, the mechanic closed his shop early and drove home, but his mind wasn't at peace. Something in his heart told him to reach out to her. He didn't know why. Maybe because he missed her, or maybe because he sensed she needed someone to remind her that not everything was falling apart. He picked up his phone and looked at her number. He didn't call right away. Instead, he whispered to himself, "If it's meant to be, she'll come back." He didn't know that at that very moment. She was sitting in her car outside his shop again, staring at the closed gate. Torn between pride and longing, she wanted to tell him everything. How her world was falling apart, how she missed their quiet talks, how she wished she had listened instead of trying to fix things with money. But she couldn't bring herself to get out. She sat there until the streetlights turned off one by one, then drove away into the night, leaving behind the only person who ever saw her not as a CEO, but as a woman trying to find her place in a world that expected her to never fall apart. And though neither of them knew it yet, life was preparing another twist, one that would bring them face to face again in the most unexpected way, when both their worlds would truly collide for the second time. Weeks passed, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. No matter how many meetings she attended or how many reports crossed her desk, her thoughts always wandered back to that small garage on the edge of town. It was strange. She had faced bigger problems before, but this silence between them felt heavier than anything she had experienced. Her company's troubles only made things worse. The board was losing confidence, investors were pulling out, and every news headline made her seem guilty by association. Even though she wasn't involved in her ex-fiancé's mistakes, people believed what they wanted to believe. That was the hardest part, losing control over her own story. One morning, she arrived at her office and found a small group of reporters waiting by the door. They shouted questions, snapping pictures, asking if she was going to resign. She didn't answer. She just walked past them with her head high, pretending not to hear the noise. Needed everything: control, success, respect, and to be happy. Now I realize, I just needed someone to see me for who I really am. He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. And I finally did. She leaned her head against his shoulder, savoring the quiet. For a long time, she had believed that love, like life, had to be earned with perfection. But here, surrounded by oil-stained tools, laughter, and determination, she understood that love didn't need perfection. It only needed honesty, patience, and care. Their evenings became a time of reflection and planning. Together, they brainstormed ways to expand the foundation, reaching more kids and families. They organized small community events, car shows, and charity drives to raise awareness and funds. She found herself smiling more, laughing more, and even enjoying the little challenges of running a nonprofit alongside someone she trusted deeply. One day, a local journalist came by to do a feature on the foundation. She expected the usual questions, but when he turned to her, he asked something that stopped her in her tracks. "Why did you leave your corporate life behind to do this?" he asked. She paused, thinking carefully. "I realize that success isn't measured by money or power," she said finally. "It's measured by impact, by the lives you touch, by the people you help become better versions of themselves, and that's the real reward." He nodded thoughtfully and asked her to meet the mechanic for a joint interview. She looked over at him, smiling, and he winked. "Let's show them what real teamwork looks like," he said. Together, they explained the mission of the foundation, the challenges they had faced, and the success stories of the students who had learned, struggled, and grown under their guidance. Parents shared how their children's confidence had grown, how they had learned responsibility, and how they now had hope for the future. After the interview, as the journalist left, she turned to him. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't met?" He shrugged, smiling softly. "Sometimes, but I don't like thinking about it. Because then I'd have to imagine a life without this, without you, without the garage, without the foundation. And that's not a life I want to imagine." She laughed quietly, leaning on him. You always know how to make me feel better. Someone has to, he said teasingly. Weeks turned into months, and the foundation grew stronger. They added new programs, one teaching electrical work, another for basic carpentry. They invited more volunteers and even started a mentorship program pairing older teens with younger students. The small garage had become a hub of hope and growth. Through it all, their relationship deepened. The bond they shared was built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. They were partners in life and in their mission, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories, and simply enjoying the quiet, ordinary moments together. One evening, after a particularly busy day, they sat on the roof of the garage watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the sunset. You know, she said softly, I never thought I'd be happy in a place like this, but now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. He smiled and wrapped his arm around her. I feel the same. Sometimes the smallest places give the biggest happiness. She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. It's funny. All those years I thought I needed control to feel safe. Now I know I only needed you. He kissed the top of her head gently. And I only needed you, he said. The next day, they received a letter from a local foundation that had been watching their work. The letter praised their efforts, highlighting how they had changed the community, given hope to countless young people, and shown that one person's dedication could ripple out to touch many lives. She read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. We did this, she said. Together, he smiled. Yeah, together. That evening, they decided to celebrate with a small gathering at the garage. Students, parents, and volunteers came, bringing food, drinks, and laughter. The garage was alive with noise, smiles, and joy. She watched him moving among the crowd, helping, guiding, laughing. She realized in that moment that this life, this love, this community, was far more valuable than any boardroom or office she had ever occupied. As the sun set and the last of the people left, they sat together on the bench outside. She looked at him, her eyes soft. Do you ever think about the past? She asked. Sometimes, he said, but it doesn't scare me anymore. The past brought us here, didn't it? She smiled. Yes, it did. They sat in silence for a while, just enjoying the comfort of being together. She realized that happiness wasn't something that happened all at once. It was built slowly, day by day, with trust, effort, and love. And for the first time in years, she felt whole. Months later, on a quiet evening, he led her to the garage's backyard, where he had built a small platform under the stars. He held her hands, looking into her eyes. You once told me to fix an engine or there would be no marriage, he said softly, a small grin on his face. Now I'm asking him, will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes. Yes, she whispered, laughing through her tears. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped a simple ring onto her finger, and they embraced, the stars above them shining like tiny witnesses to their journey. They had been tested, pushed and broken in ways they never imagined, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. Their love wasn't built on luxury or ease. It was built on patience, respect, and the understanding that life's true value is in the people you care about and the difference you make in the world. As they stood together, looking at the workshop, the students, and the life they had created, she whispered, Thank you for fixing more than just engines. He smiled, holding her close. Thank you for letting me. The night settled softly around them, peaceful and full of promise. They knew the journey ahead would have challenges, but together, they could face anything. And for the first time in their lives, both of them understood what it meant to be truly happy. Not because of what they had, but because of who they had found in each other. Needed everything, control, success, respect, and to be happy. Now I realize, I just needed someone to see me for who I really am. He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. And I finally did. She leaned her head against his shoulder, savoring the quiet. For a long time, she had believed that love, like life, had to be earned with perfection. But here, surrounded by oil-stained tools, laughter, and determination, she understood that love didn't need perfection. It only needed honesty, patience, and care. Their evenings became a time of reflection and planning. Together, they brainstormed ways to expand the foundation, reaching more kids and families. They organized small community events, car shows, and charity drives to raise awareness and funds. She found herself smiling more, laughing more, and even enjoying the little challenges of running a nonprofit alongside someone she trusted deeply. One day, a local journalist came by to do a feature on the foundation. She expected the usual questions, but when he turned to her, he asked something that stopped her in her tracks. "Why did you leave your corporate life behind to do this?" he asked. She paused, thinking carefully. "I realize that success isn't measured by money or power," she said finally. "It's measured by impact, by the lives you touch, by the people you help become better versions of themselves, and that's the real reward." He nodded thoughtfully and asked her to meet the mechanic for a joint interview. She looked over at him smiling, and he winked. "Let's show them what real teamwork looks like," he said. Together, they explained the mission of the foundation, the challenges they had faced, and the success stories of the students who had learned, struggled, and grown under their guidance. Parents shared how their children's confidence had grown, how they had learned responsibility, and how they now had hope for the future. After the interview, as the journalist left, she turned to him. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't met?" He shrugged, smiling softly. "Sometimes, but I don't like thinking about it. Because then I'd have to imagine a life without this, without you, without the garage, without the foundation. And that's not a life I want to imagine." She laughed quietly, leaning on him. "You always know how to make me feel better." "Someone has to," he said teasingly. Weeks turned into months, and the foundation grew stronger. They added new programs, one teaching electrical work, another for basic carpentry. They invited more volunteers and even started a mentorship program pairing older teens with younger students. The small garage had become a hub of hope and growth. Through it all, their relationship deepened. The bond they shared was built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. They were partners in life and in their mission, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories, and simply enjoying the quiet, ordinary moments together. One evening, after a particularly busy day, they sat on the roof of the garage watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the sunset. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd be happy in a place like this. But now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." He smiled and wrapped his arm around her. "I feel the same. Sometimes the smallest places give the biggest happiness." She leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes. "It's funny. All those years I